Hi guys, welcome back or welcome to Switch to Life, and today we're going to be reviewing Monsters University, the prequel movie to the Monsters Inc. movie, both of which are made by Pixar. And the main reason I'm doing this now is because the TV show Monsters at Work is about to get its second season on Disney Plus starting on May 5th. In fact, the second season is currently being released right now on Disney Channel. So, with that out of the way, it's time to dive into the first installment in the Monsters Inc. franchise, chronologically at least, and it's time to review Monsters University. So, Monsters University is a prequel film that came out over 10 years after the original movie, but it was still really good. I really loved the animation quality, a definite upgrade, and probably the best animation out of the entire Monsters Inc. franchise. I also really enjoyed the voice acting as well as the music for this movie, but above all else, the thing that I really loved about this was the world building. It's really nice that we learned that monsters didn't just grow up to be scary, they had to learn to be scary, and it's really cool that, like us, they had to study certain techniques so that they could learn to be the best scarers possible. Now, what Pixar really likes to do is pull at your emotions, and in this film, they actually do that by telling the origin story of how Mike Wazowski and James P. Sullivan became best friends, and how it evolved into the friendship that we find in Monsters Inc. I'm gonna be honest, I really enjoyed this movie, but sadly, it just wasn't as good as the original film, unfortunately. It was really funny, yes, and definitely had its moments and highlights, and honestly, I loved what it was trying to do. I can't imagine a way to make this film better, but again, it's just not as good as it was back in the original. So, with that out of the way, it's time to dive into the story, and I really enjoyed the story. It starts with a prologue where we see a young, maybe 5-year-old Mike Wazowski going to Monsters Inc. to check out what monsters do for a living, at which point he decides to break the rules and sees the monsters in action up close, at which point he decides that he wants to become a scarer just like them, and the best way to do that? Attend Monsters University. So, throughout his life, Mike Wazowski just studied, trained hard, and he became a top scarer of his class, got enough credits to be able to enroll into Monsters University, at which point he meets his new roommate, Randall Boggs, the villain of the first Monsters Inc. movie. But, of course, at this point, he's not really a villain, he's just a student trying to find a way to be considered cool, and I guess that's really cool. It's nice we see this side of Randall. At which point, Mike Wazowski then attends his first class, which is Scaring 101, taught by Professor Knight. And then we meet the new student, James P. Sullivan, who is apparently the son of a Sullivan, who is considered one of the best scarers to have ever lived. Due to this, James, who I'm just going to call Sully from now on, is actually a bit cocky. He thinks that his whole life is going to be handed to him because his dad happens to be the best, so scaring has got to be in his blood. So he doesn't actually train or study or anything, and it really shows when, as the class progresses, Mike Wazowski keeps getting better and better grades, while Sully is just passing. Sully isn't actually trying to learn any new skills, he essentially just does what he wants. Anyway, we learned that in order to get popular, James P. Sullivan performs a stunt where he steals the FearTech's mascot, who is a rival school of Monsters University, at which point he's considered a member of Roar Omega Roar. But in the process, he also ended up breaking into Mike Wazowski's dorm room, which is when the two officially meet.
Your room? This is not my room.
And, of course, the pig actually escapes, but thanks to Mike Wazowski, he's caught again. Anyway, Sully ends up becoming a member of Roar Omega Roar thanks to his stunt, The group is actually a really top scaring club that is led by Johnny Worthington. Now, Johnny is actually a really smart guy. He knows who should be in his friend group because not only is James really cool, but he's also a Sullivan. Having that kind of reputation would be awesome. Unfortunately, as time passes, he realizes that Sully isn't really into his academics. He's just passing. He's not actually trying to become a better scarer. Unlike Mike Wazowski, who is studying extremely hard. Now, when Johnny Worthington first met him, he thought that Mike was just a goofball who never had a chance of being a good scarer. But after seeing his grades and academics and how hard Mike is pushing himself, he's actually considering that being outbeat by a loser like Mike Wazowski would be bad for their reputation. So he decides to kick Sully out unless he passes the final exam, getting a higher score than Mike Wazowski. Because of this, Sully ends up trying to get into Mike's head, which ends up being a problem because the two get into a fight during the final exam, at which point they are tested by Dean Hardscramble, the president of Monsters University and the holder of the all-time scare record. Now, she doesn't actually test them, she just tells them their flaws and why they are not allowed to take the test. Sully is a really scary monster, but he's not willing to push himself or learn anything new. Now, the thing is, each kid needs a different scaring tactic. If Sullivan can only do the one, then that means he can't be a good scarer. Then there's Mike Wazowski, who just isn't scary at all. He might be knowledgeable about everything when it comes to scaring, but there's no way that he himself can be a scarer. So both Mike and Sully end up failing the exam, which means they're kicked out of the class, and unfortunately that means that they just have to find a new degree, and they both decide to become can designers or something, at which point Mike makes a certain discovery about the scare games. Anyone can join, literally anyone. So Mike builds himself a team out of the Uzma Kappa people who are apparently the losers of Monsters University. At which point Mike ends up making a deal where if his team wins, they will be allowed back into the scaring program. At which point Dean says that everyone on the team will be allowed, and then all that remains is that they need to find one more member to join the team. Sully, realizing that this is his chance, ends up joining the team, much to Mike's reluctance. So now the two are forced to work together, and thus they have to train the new Uzma Kappa candidates to be really good at the scare games and good at scaring in general, which is great because Sully is a good scarer and Mike happens to know everything there is to know about scaring. So they already have a pretty good team, they just need to learn to work together. Unfortunately, they don't work together during the first scare game, which causes them all to lose. And they would be kicked out if it weren't for the fact that another team ended up cheating. So the Uzma Kappa has to do better, and during the second scare game, they end up breaking formation, at which point Mike realizes that there are things about the Uzma Kappa members that makes them unique and stand out. And then, after managing to win that scare game, they end up being invited to a party where the Roar Omega Roar team, alongside the other scare game teams, end up pulling a bit of a prank on them, which actually makes them feel like losers and rejects, and they'll never be as good of scarers as the other teams that are in the scare games. So Mike comes up with the idea that they should break into Monsters, Inc., at which point they see what exactly makes monsters tick. At which point Mike reveals that each monster doesn't do one specific technique. They do stuff that is unique to them. They become the best scarers that they themselves can be, using their differences to stand out. This whole time, Mike has been trying to make Uzma Kappa into Mike Wazowski's, when really he should be trying to find their differences, find what makes them unique, and turn them into the best scarers they can be. When they actually do this, they end up passing the third game with flying colors, as well as the fourth. But when it comes to the fifth and final game, Dean Hardscramble has a talk with Sully, where she reveals that she doesn't have faith in their team just because Mike isn't scary. He might be knowledgeable knowledgeable about scaring. He works harder than all of the rest of the team combined, but there's no way that he is scary. So Sully is losing confidence in the team, at which point when they actually do compete in the scare games, he says that Mike Wazowski should go last as he started this, so it feels right that he should finish it. So Mike Wazowski agrees, at which point the rest of the team participate in their scare games, and Sullivan even manages to throw off Randall's game, making it so that he doesn't score as high on the Scaratron as he would have otherwise, which leads to Randall holding a bit of a grudge against Sullivan, and since then they become rivals. Finally, Mike competes against Johnny Worthington, who ends up getting a really good score, but Mike ends up pulling away with the perfect score. At which point, the Uzma Kappa actually wins the scare games, but unfortunately, this is when Mike discovers that Sully cheated and tampered with the controls, which leads to him revealing that Mike Wazowski isn't actually scary, and he doesn't have faith in him. And thus, Mike actually decides to break into the door lab, go into the real world, and scare an actual kid. But unfortunately, he's not scary. It just fails miserably. So after confessing what he did to Dean Hardscramble, Sully ends up breaking into the door lab and going after Mike, at which point the two have a heart-to-heart where Mike is just sad and depressed that he spent his whole life trying to be a scarer, but he just can't. He doesn't have the potential. And it's at this point that Sully makes him feel better by confessing his true feelings. Sully is, as it stands, a Sullivan, which means he has a big legacy to live up to, and he's constantly afraid that he will never live up to that legacy. He tries to act cool and collected, but deep down, he's terrified. At which point the two are discovered by humans who mistake Sully as a bear, and they run back into the cabin to escape and go back to the monster world, but they discover that the store station was turned off for people's safety, at which point Mike comes up with the idea that if they scare the adults, they can actually power the door from this side, rather than wait for someone to come and rescue them. So, using Mike's brilliant scaring brain, as well as Sully's scariness, they end up scaring the adults so bad that they overload the door and make it so that they actually powered it to the point where they get through just before it explodes. Unfortunately, by breaking into the door lab, this means that Mike and Sully were expelled from Monsters University, while the rest of the class was accepted into Scaring 101. So Mike and Sully go out into the world to find a job for themselves, and they end up being hired in the mailroom at Monsters, Inc., and they eventually work their way up the ladder until they become the scarer and door station operator, and essentially become the best team that Monsters, Inc. has ever hired. And that's how Monsters University ends. I really enjoyed watching this movie, and it's really cool to see the origin story of Mike Wazowski and Sully's friendship. And it's really cool to see Sully evolve as a character from being a cocky jock into a really supportive best friend. But with that in mind, I hope that you guys enjoyed my review. Please make sure to like and subscribe so you can keep up to date on all things DreamWorks, as this is a DreamWorks focused channel, but also so you can check out my upcoming reviews for Monsters, Inc., as well as the full series review for Monsters at Work. With that in mind, I hope you're all staying safe out there, and I will see you all in my next video. Bye-bye.
I can't believe it. I'm officially a college